Welcome to Knock Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues with Rabbi Chaim Coffman from the Holy Land. Chaim, you're going to make me do it, aren't you? Chaim Checkmate Coffman.
I didn't say anything.
It was funny, though. Hey, to be fair...
I'm sitting here about my own business. Come on.
Hey, to be fair, it was just we were cutting off the show, and we were doing a sound check or something. And I was like, check one, check two. He goes, checkmate, and it turned into Chaim Checkmate Coffman. It's like he's a WWF wrestler or something. Oh my gosh, that's funny.
Well, you know where checkmate came from, because I was talking about oral law on Pirkei Avos, and I used my question about, King David and the fact that he comes from Ruth, and Ruth's not, and the Moabites never allowed to convert. So I said, how do you get to King David if 3 generations later, right? She comes out of, King David comes out of Ruth. Ruth can't convert, so how can King David be Jewish? So you have to come on to oral law. If you don't come on to oral law, then you have to come up with some sort of answer, throughout, the Torah, Tanakh, something, and not going to come up with an answer. So that's why I said checkmate.
That's so true. Very good.
Answer. That was the answer. I mean, I give the answer, but that is the origins of not, I didn't even play a WWE star, even though I might have wanted to, but that wasn't the case.
That's funny. Well, cool. So there you go. So our title up for the day is the oral law just a simple another telephone game? When you said that title, it totally made me think of that, because he said, and next thing you know, he's saying something totally different than the first guy. Like sitting around in a circle whispering to your friends, playing that little telephone game. So yeah, that's a really great topic for today. And let's. So I'm assuming that you are going to address why it's not. That's the big key, or how do we know it's not, right?
Wait a minute, you didn't tell me about the topic. What are you talking about? What's going on? All right, give me 35 seconds. Wait a minute, let's think about this. Now we got it good. I think hopefully we got it good. So, it's interesting. We spoke. This is the third video on oral law, right? The first one I think was probably the most crucial, because people get caught up in this idea that, why do I have to listen to the rabbis, right? The rabbis add, they subtract, they add, to the Torah. I think for most Messianics, most Christians, or whatever, that is the biggest issue, right? Then we spoke about, okay, why is it oral, right? I think it's, somewhat of a lesser issue. Again, I think the first one, the first question is really, it's really the crux over here. And the third, is you get some people ask, how do I know it's the same? Right? How do I know that the Torah is exactly the same? Why isn't it like this great game of broken telephone, right? How does broken telephone go? Right? You tell somebody something and they have to repeat it to someone else, and they have to repeat it to someone else. By the time you get to the 50th person, it never sounds the same. It won't sound anything similar to the first person who said it. So obviously, if this has gone on for more than 1,000 years before the oral law was written down, right? You got actually 1,500 years till Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Anosti wrote it down. Then how can it not be distorted, right? That would be the $1 million question over here. That should be, right? It should be 100% distorted. How do we know? How do we know that it's accurate? Now, anyone's ever learned Talmud, right? Anyone who's ever learned it, there's always a give and take. One said like this, one rabbi said like this, another rabbi said like that. Said, how could you have said that? There's another source over here, or there's something else. Maybe it's a contradiction in what you said exactly, right? A whole bunch of questions trying to get to the veracity, of what was said. So if there would be one chain, right, then I'd understand it'd be a problem. Because if you have one chain, in each one passing down the same thing, maybe it isn't going to be remembered, right? But what if there are thousands of chains, thousands, of links, so to speak? So if you have 10 lines, let's say you had 10 lines of children that are in each group. So they ask the last person what they heard, right? Again, you only have 10, right? You have a small group. One person said something, goes around. what are the odds that the 10th person probably heard what the first person said? Probably pretty good, right? It's going to be 100%, may not be 100%, right? But it's still, the odds are very good that it's not going to get distorted, right? So in that case, if you have more chains, right? Let's say you have 1,000 chains, you have, 10,000 chains, they're remembering this. So, another group is remembering this, another 1,000 chains remembering something else, another 1,000 chains, whatever. They are going to remember much better than if you only had a handful of individuals. So until it was written down, right, that would be the obvious question. How many chains are out there? So, for instance, we'll give an example. Women who learn to take challah, right, or light Shabbos candles, right? A woman is baking challah before Shabbos, so they'll question how much dough there has to be in order to what we call take challah. You take a piece of it and it has to get burnt, right? Depending how much dough there is. How would a woman know how to do that, right? How would a child know how to do that? Well, she must have learned it from who? Obviously from her mother, right? Her mother taught her how to do it. Well, that's a good question. How did her mother teach her, right? So she must have learned from her mother, and her mother from her mother, right? Shabbos candles, no different, right? So we can actually use an example. We can use use another example, and Nisan, the 15th of the month of Nisan. 15th of the month of Nisan is Passover, right? So Passover is an obligation, the Torah tells me. Vigadati lebincha, there's an obligation for a father to tell over the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Now, this is one event that happened, more than 3,000 years ago. So therefore, how do I know it actually happened? There is such an opinion that, I shouldn't say an opinion, but, a conservative rabbi once got up, seventh day of Passover, in front of his congregants and said, the Exodus from Egypt never happened, right? So, if I would have been there being a little bit obnoxious, I would have said, okay, so why do we eat matzah? Why do we clean our house for any leavened product? Because it's a myth. What do you mean it's a myth? I have to eat 35 pounds of matzah and whistle Dixie in 2.5 minutes? You'll go nuts. You won't be able to do it. We have a lot of fun trying to do that. Why would we do that if it didn't exist? Or you want to tell me maybe there's an idea? I mean, there is such an idea. How'd the miracles happen? The miracles in Egypt happened because Saturn was out of orbit. I mean, there is such a crazy opinion. Be that as it may, one event, right? One event in history. So you go anywhere in the world, no matter how watered down the Passover Seder is, you're going to see on the table 3 matzahs, 4 cups of wine. You're going to see a bit of herbs, or herbs, depending where you're from. And you're going to see the cup for Elijah. That's all the same. Now you're going to say, well, how do we know that? Right? How is it possible everywhere in the world it's going to be the same? So we'll say like this. Usually the Passover Seder, right, before we get to the other ideas, when a person was at the Passover Seder, there were normally 4 generations, right? There was a great-grandfather, grandfather, and a father and a son. You're going to say, how could a great-grandfather be there? He'd probably be dead, right? But if you have kids early, a person, let's say his great-grandfather had a child at the age of 23, right? 24. So 20 years later, become a grandfather, right? 20 years after that, he's 60, right? He's in the mid-60s. So therefore, not in our circles, right, in the ultra-Orthodox community, be a great-grandfather many times over. So that being the case, there are always 4 generations at a Passover Seder. You have the great-grandfather, grandfather, father, and a son. Now, the great-grandfather, at one point, obviously, was the little son at the Seder. Now, how many generations you have there? Let's say the great-grandfather is 70, right? The youngest kid is 2, right? So you got a 68-year difference. Now, remember, when that great-grandfather was the youngest son, also there could have been a 60-year difference. So there's a swing between those 2 Seders, right? You have 130 years. So if you take those generations at the Passover Seder, right, those 4 generations, 80 generations before is given the Torah Mount Sinai. Now you're going to say, wow, 80 generations, that's a tremendous amount of time. Now let's think. That great-grandfather, right? So you're talking, let's say, 70 years ago. Right? 70 years ago. Now, when he was a child, So you go back another 70 years, right, to his great-grandfather, it's 140 years, right? You're already in the 1800s, 1860s. Now, you take that, you go back, now you're in the, 1700s, right? Almost late 1600s. It's not that big of a jump, right? You get great-great or great-great-great-grandfather in the 1500s, right? So now to go back from there, right, to the 1500s, you get to the time, you get the time of Rashi, the Rambam, in the time of 1100, 1200. It's not that far back from there to the rabbis, later rabbis, early rabbis, etc. So 80 of those generations goes back to the giving of the Torah Mount Sinai. Now, if I were to tell you it's 3,500 years, you're going to say, come on, 3,500 years, that's a long time. If you look at it in terms of generations, right, and everybody's doing the exact same thing. I mean, you have a mezuzah on the door, talks about the Exodus from Egypt, right? We say Kiddush Friday night, mentions the Exodus from Egypt. The almost entire evening service, the Exodus from Egypt, everything revolves around that. God intervenes in history. Well, it's kind of funny if it didn't exist, but God intervenes in history. So that being the case, you have one event and you have around the world, right, that same day, the 15th of Nisan, everybody doing the same thing. You're going to say, why? Isn't it a big game, a telephone? How did they get it right? Well, this is one way, right? They passed the chain down, right? And so how does the son ask the question to the father? How do I know there was an Exodus from Egypt? The father explains the story. How did the father know the story? His father told him, right? His grandfather told him, right? He was there. I mean, it wasn't there, but I'm saying he was at his own Seder, and his grandfather told him, right? So therefore, normally, I would say a parent is not going to lie to a child, not going to say about this generation, but normally that's the case. So if that's the case and it's passed down that way, it's no different than how do I know if I'm a Kohen or a Levi, right? In other words, how do I know I'm from that tribe? Because it's something that's known. It's something that's passed down generation to generation. How did someone's father know he's a Kohen? Because his father told him. How does his father know? Because his father told him, right? Okay, so that's one chain. Can that chain get messed up? Technically, it could. But something like that doesn't normally get messed up because it's passed down in the family. Usually something passed down is not going to necessarily get messed up. Over here, you got a much bigger question, right? You have 1,500 years. Right, we're not talking 50 years. We're not talking 60 years. We're not talking 100 years, right, or 150 years. This is 10 times the amount, right? So therefore, if you had one chain, I agree, total distortion, right? If you had one chain of 100 people, you get to the 100th person, forget it, right? He's not going to repeat he's not going to repeat, what the first person said. But if you have multiple chains, right, thousands of chains, then it's possible because that chain is going to pass down what they need to pass down, right? They're going to get it right because it's a much greater percentage, right? We mentioned by 10 kids. You get to the 10th kid, most likely, we'll give him an 85% chance. I'll cut him some slack. 85% chance he's going to say the exact same thing as the first person. That's a much greater percentage. So you're going to say, but it's 3,000 years ago. Again, how many chains are we talking about, right? We're talking about thousands of chains. That's one idea. Second idea is that when was this message given over? The message is given over not when they're 25, not when they're 30, not when they're 40, when they're little, right? From a very young age, right? When do you start learning Torah, right? So what's the answer? You say, well, when he can speak, when he can understand. It's not necessarily true. When the person's born, baby comes home from the hospital, right? Come Shabbos, what's the baby going to smell? Challah. What are we going to give him? Give him a little bit of grape juice. It's going to go, he's going to go chomp, 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 or he's going to suck it, whatever the case is. He's already going to get that, or she is going to get that sense that there's something different about Shabbos. Normally I get other food, Shabbos I get, all these other things. So that can be something even if he can't hear, or the child can't speak, right? At that very young age, you got to say, what can the child process, right? What can they fathom? When they get something sweet and it's not the normal thing they get, they know the difference, right? They're certainly not stupid. Kids understand from a very young age, something that's sweet, it may kill you in the process. It also tastes good, right? So they want more of it. They enjoy it. So that's another thing that started at a very young age. So if it starts at a very young age, then the mnemonics of how they're going to remember and what it is going to be much more ingrained. It's not like, oh, I'm starting at a disadvantage. What's going to happen? He gets Alzheimer's and he forgets or whatever. No, you start from the beginning, right? You start teaching them from the very beginning, right? I was speaking to someone earlier. There was a question about educating kids, right? For the sake of conversion. So what do? I said, you educate them. There's an obligation even at a very young age. What's the first thing we teach them when they learn how to speak? We teach them Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, right? God commanded the Torah to Moshe, right? To Moshe Rabbeinu. How can you teach them even at a very young age, even, if they don't understand, let's say about making blessings or whatever, right? You can have them see videos, Uncle Moshe, right? Different songs about mitzvahs. That's how you ingrain it, when they are young. When it's older, it's much harder if they're not interested or whatever. But once they're ingrained when they're young, it's much better. It's going to stick to them. They're going to remember it. Certainly they remember it through songs. Had a whole song fest here a few weeks ago on Shabbos. My kids singing like all these different, Uncle Moshe songs and, other things that they remember when they're younger. But what does it teach? It teaches about Torah, teaches about mitzvahs, teaches about chesed, right? Doing acts of loving kindness. You start when you're young. Once you start when you're young, you can build that, right? Because their memories get better. So you can start inculcating them, giving them information. Now, it doesn't have to be big chunks of information. You can start giving them information that they can remember, that they can spit back, that they know. But when they start from a young age, it's like something they have, right? It's something in their hand. So something like that is not going to be, it's certainly not going to be forgotten, right? That's another idea. Now, also, it's pretty logical, right? The system itself, is logical and can be reconstructed through its own rules. Now, it's not like a series of numbers, right? A random series of numbers. If I forgot a number, you can't use it. Imagine there used to be rotary phones, right? Phones without caller ID. I don't know if anyone remembers that, right? The thing of the past. Nobody remembers telephone numbers today. It's like, oh, mommy, speed dial 1. My kids, speed dial 2, right? What's the phone number? Nobody knows, right? Nobody remembers, right? Because if you get one number wrong, it's the wrong number, right? So it can't be that the Torah would be so illogical and so dependent on, let's say, a random series of numbers, letters, whatever it is. No one's ever going to remember it. So there's a logical way. There is exegesis, right? Biblical exegesis, 13 ways, right? 13 ways to interpret the Torah. So again, the Karaites out there would say, hey, rabbis, can't do that. They got it right. It's biblical exegesis, right? Helps them remember, helps them understand, helps them make connection between the words in different places and all that, right? So therefore, using exegesis is something that's logical. If it wouldn't be something logical and it would be something random, we wouldn't be having this discussion. It would be like the Matrix, right? You take a look at the Matrix, get all these numbers, letters, this, that, everything going in front of you can't make heads or tails, right? You wouldn't be able to make heads or tails of it. So therefore, has to be logic, right? Has to be logical. What's another point? The centrality. In other words, if the message is central, it is important. A lot of these things, this is the most important thing in our lives, how we derive Jewish law, why we do what we do. What did the rabbi say? How do we learn it? All that. If it's central to your life, if it's the most important thing that you ever do, it's not something you'll forget. Give an example. Everybody knows, if I would ask the question, right, most people would probably give me an answer to the penny. Right? Most people know if you'd ask them how much money you have in your pocket. Right? Most people can tell you probably on the spot. Right? Question is, okay, give or take 10 cents, 20 cents, whatever. Most people know exactly how much money's in their pocket. Why do they know how much money is in their pocket? Very simple, because it's important. It's something I need to know. Right? You're going out, you'll get your gas tank, you need money to get gas. Right? Whatever it is. You need money for whatever. So a person's going to know. Why are they going to know? because it's something important. Now, this is a tremendous thing against us. I'll tell you why is it against Jews in general about remembering. So I'll tell the following story. The amazing story happened to me that I was once telling over, my Rebbe different things that I learned, about a certain subject. And in the middle, when I said it over, he said, okay, stop. So I said, what do you mean? Why stop? He said, you misquoted it. There was one of the commentaries in the back, and he said, you misquoted one of the later rabbis, one of the Gaonim. So I said, what are you talking about? I just saw it yesterday. He goes, I'm telling you, you misquoted it. So I said, I don't want to embarrass anyone. He goes, take off the tractate, take the Gemara, open it up, read it. So I opened it up and I read it, and he was right. I misquoted one of the names. So I don't know, my Rebbe had seen, this piece of Talmud, like, one of these commentators, it could have been years or whatever, but he still remembered it verbatim. So he told me the following fundamental principle. And this was the greatest love tap I ever got in my life. He told me the following thing. He said, listen, how can you not remember who said what in the Talmud? Oh, maybe it was Rava. Maybe it was Abaye. Maybe it was, this Gaon, that Gaon. How could you not remember? So he told me the following. He said, I'm going to tell you a fundamental principle. And the fundamental principle is if you can't remember who said it, that means it's not important to you. If it's not important to you, I have no obligation to listen. And he said, don't forget to shut the door on the way out. Checkmate. And I was like, wow, that was pretty impressive. So someone said when you were walking out the door after you got slammed upside the head, what were your thoughts? What were you thinking? I said, that was the single greatest love tap ever. What was the principle? The principle is, right, as my Rebbe would ask, he says, you tell me how much money's in your pocket, right? Talmud says clear, right? Someone's going to know that. That's something important to them because they put their hand in their pocket all the time. So they know how much money is there. But if you can't remember who said what, now you're going to say, okay, maybe you got a faulty memory. Maybe, any number of things. But if it's that important for you to remember, money's important. You have to know how much money's in your pocket. Torah's not important. You don't care who said what. You can make a mistake. Oh, it was Abaye, it was Rava, it was this one, it was that one. That shows it's not important. So over here, so why do I tell that story? I tell that story because the centrality of the issue, meaning if it's that important to our lives, which it is our life. It's what's kept the Jewish people Jewish throughout the millennium, that we're attached to Torah, we're attached to oral law. If that wouldn't be the case, then we'd all disappear like the rest of the Jews that have no connection to Torah. Because very simple, they want to pass down a nice feeling of Judaism. Problem is, you can't pass down the body. It's like the body without the soul, right? If you don't have the soul, guess what? The body dies. You need both. You can't just pass down a feeling. Imagine, you want your kid to put on tefillin, phylacteries, whatever they are, and your kid comes up to you and says, Dad, it's a nice idea. You like chocolate? I like vanilla. It's like, no, you really have to like chocolate. You try and force him to eat chocolate. He's not going to eat chocolate because it doesn't mean anything, right? It's a body without a soul. So if it's central to your life, if it's so important, how are you ever going to forget it? That's not something you would forget, right? Money in your pocket, you're not going to forget. This is so crucial to Judaism, not something that you would forget. That's another point. Fourth point, or third point, depending where I'm holding here, is there are references in the Torah. There are references in the writings. There are references in the prophets. Now, people could write their own private scrolls. Doesn't mean that they're going to read from them. Right, necessarily. That wouldn't have the status necessarily of a Sefer Torah, right, of a Torah scroll. Regardless, they could write things down. If they could write things down, right, you have cliff notes. So if you had cliff notes, you highlight certain things, whatever it is, also you remember, right? Another way, another possible way to remember. There was also review. There was also mnemonic devices. People used their memory in many, many different ways in order to memorize, right? So therefore today, what do people want to do? They want to learn new things, right? No one wants to go over something that they already learned. They say, come on, I already know it. Why should I go over it? So there's an obligation, at least for Jews, there's an obligation that a person should know something so well, should know every aspect of Torah so well, that when someone asks you a question, you got an answer on the spot. You don't have to think. There are no doubts. Why? Because if you reviewed enough, right, then it's like second nature. Question is, can you pull that information out? So I've seen it in a major way, right? I've seen my Rebbe in action, in a rabbinical court. It's one thing to know what the Talmud says and some of the commentaries say, but to put everything together and to pull from here and to pull from there, whatever, to make a case, it's pretty impressive, right? So therefore, it has to be part of you. It has to be crucial, right? You have to review, because if you don't review, it's kind of like threshing without seeding, or vice versa. You can't seed if you don't dig up the dirt. You could. Nothing's going to take root, right? You got to dig up the dirt. So you have to keep going over. You have to keep reviewing, right? It gets easier the more that you do it. It becomes like second nature, but people don't like to do it. We're lazy, right? We already said, I already got this down. Let me go further, right? So, you review a little bit, then you go further, right? But you have to constantly review. If you don't constantly review, you certainly are going to forget. And God forbid somebody doesn't learn one day. You don't learn one day. It's like taking 2 steps backwards, right? You gotta fight to get back on that level. It's very hard, right? It's very, very hard. So therefore, there's an obligation to learn every day, right? But here, if you want to pass it down, how in the world are you going to pass it down? You have to pass it down by review, because if you don't review, you don't have any mnemonic devices or somehow that you're gonna use the memory, or whatever you have, so to speak, in order to remember. You have to figure out how you're going to do that. But you have to have certain ways to do it in order that you're going to remember, and you're going to be able to pass it down, right? So another aspect is that you have to look at the whole society. So when the Torah was oral, so you had most of the Jews were in Israel and Babylon. That's where the Jewish people were, in the Fertile Crescent. They were in Israel or in Babylonia. And the Jews were ruled, right? They were ruled by Jews in Israel, and even in Babylon, right? This is before the Greeks. And even in Babylon, they were allowed their own autonomy, which the Babylonian government allowed us to rule over ourselves. So what do we use? We use Jewish law. We didn't use non-Jewish law, right? Even though that was the law of the land, they're able to use Jewish law. So in other words, if you're able to live it, it makes it real. If you're able to live it, it's much harder to distort, right? Why is there tremendous mistranslation and distortion, right, when it comes to Torah? You got the Christians, you got the Karaites, right? You got the Messianics, you got Reform Jews, conservative Jews. What's the issue? Why is there distortion? There's distortion for one very simple reason, because they don't sit down to learn it, right? They misquote, they take things out of context, they misinterpret, they mistranslate. They're not interested in going deeper. Why not? Because there's an agenda. If I find out it's true, I have to keep it. I'm not willing to change, right? Most people coming out of Christianity, what was the last straw, right? Once they saw so many different contradictions, they say, okay, now I'm ready to hear what Rabbi Singer has to say. Now I want to hear what Rabbi Skobac has to say. Before that, why aren't they willing to do it? It's cognitive dissonance. They don't want to do it because what if they're right, right? What if the other side is right? So what do? They take all these crazy statements out of the Talmud. Jews are not called are called animals, and we allow 3-year-olds to have relations and all these different things. That's beautiful. Quote it out of context. Why don't you quote it in context? Why don't you understand? Why don't you sit down and understand what it means? Because you're not interested. You have an agenda. You want to make the Jewish people look bad. You want to say, the rabbis this and the rabbis that and whatever the case is. But you pick and you pull and you twist, right, and all that, because it's not part of you, right? Since it's not part of you, you're not going to review it. You're not going to learn it. You're going to take it for whatever you want, and you're going to badmouth the Jewish people. Okay, right? I would be much happier if people would just say, that's what I'm doing. But if you want to say, how could the Jewish people, how could the Jewish God do this, right? How could he want to kill these people? What do you mean? People go against God. The whole question spoke about last week. We're not going to go into the riots now. But one of the 7 Noahide laws is stealing. Right? Doesn't matter why you steal. I'm going to speak about that more tomorrow, my Q&A. But doesn't matter why you're doing it. Doesn't matter how you grew up. If you steal, what's the penalty? According to the Torah, whether you hold the Noahide laws or not, what's the penalty? Death. No warning. I could take a shotgun. I know he's coming in to loot. I could kill him on the spot. If there wouldn't be a law of the land, right? Why is it so severe? Because all the Noahide laws are universal, according to the Torah. Don't steal, don't kill, right? So if it's universal, you can't do. I didn't know I wasn't allowed to do that because it's not a part of them, right? They just want to do and manipulate. They want to use it for their own good. You're going to say, well, don't the Jews do that? Absolutely not, right? We're looking at what the truth is. What did the rabbis say? What did they mean? So if someone wants to take it out of context, very easy, right? When we did this, on pedophilia and other things, that we did, a year and a half ago, etc. We pulled out a whole laundry list. It was a good laundry list. I was like, I hope we have answers. It was a very good list, of things totally 100% taken out of context, right? And every single answer was in context. You're going to say it's apologetics. That's not what they meant. You got to take it at face value. All right, you want to understand what's going on? Do you want to understand what the circumstances are? You're going to say a 3-year-old, how can they have relations? Well, you under the opinion that 6-year-olds could give birth back then. A 6-year-old, right? Take somebody like Rivka. Rivka, even though there's a miracle that the water came up, to feed 10 camels. You know how much 10 camels have to drink? 400 gallons. I don't even know how many liters. 800 liters, 900 liters. And she was all of 3. Now, even if a 3-year-old at that time was more like an 11-year-old, take any 11-year-old girl, even if the water comes up and you're feeding 10 camels, 900 liters, that's going to be pretty darn difficult, right? Forget about the miracle and everything else, but you're talking about a different time, right? So if you're going to say, oh, a 3-year-old, how can a 3-year-old? 3-year-old doesn't know anything. That's not true. Back then, it's a whole different story. No, but you want to misquote it. You want to tell me, oh, that's what it means. It's not what it means, right? So you want to say, I don't hold to this, and it's all garbage. It's all made up. You can say what you want. You have to look at it in context, right? What you're doing isn't fair. If you want to argue, you want to talk about truth and you want to talk about fairness, then look at it at face value, right? Look at it in a way that it can be understood, right? Because if you look at it at face value, I agree. It looks kind of crazy, right? In that one case, the Talmud's not telling you, okay, you take our 3-year-old daughter, and make her into a harlot, make her into a prostitute. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about that. If it happened, someone came upon her, this, that, okay, what is the law? We're not advocating it. We're not putting them out there. Oh, that's such a great thing. This is what we want to do with our kids. You have to look at it in context, right? You want to take it out of context. Okay, it's nothing I can do, right? But at least be man enough or woman enough to say, I'm taking it out of context, because there's a whole meaning there. You can't just, if you look at so many different things, I see this all the time. People say, how can this mean this? Okay, let's analyze. Let's see. Let's see what it means. Let's see what it's getting at. Does it really mean that? Or is there another definition, right? Is it Webster's 4th definition or 3rd definition? But you can't take something, oh, this statement, that statement, 50 statements, the rabbis are this, the rabbis are that. You don't understand one of them. You can't even read Hebrew. I don't care if you read English. You got to understand the context, right? So what's the point here? The point is that if it's part of you and you're learning the law to live it, that is the point. It's much harder to distort. Why is it harder to distort? You're right there. You're right in it. Okay, no one can go to stadiums today, but it's like you're at the 50-yard line, right? You're at the 50-yard line. You can see everything. You can even see if they're cheating, right? I'm from Boston. Yeah, you can even see if they're cheating, right? Stealing signals and other things. Who knows? Whatever it is, right? But the point is, you're there. If you're there, don't you see it in a different context? You see it like it's live right now. It's right in front of your face. How are you going to distort that? That's not something that's going to be distorted. It's something that's going to be lived. But you see from the Passover story, from the Haggadah, everyone sitting at the table, they're not telling different stories. They might have different interpretations. Okay, what did the Exodus mean? You know, what is slavery today? How do we relate to it? Different things. I'm talking the straight story. The straight story is, everyone agrees, the Jews were in Egypt, right? Even according to King James, the Jews were in Egypt. So if the Jews are in Egypt, so we have an obligation, Torah tells me, to tell the story. All right, do I have to go through this elaborated thing and eat matzah and all that? I have to have matzah, the Torah tells me. I have to have maror, I have to have bitter herbs. But imagine, generations later, thousands of years later, why are we still doing it? How do we able to do that? Because it got passed down, right? Because it became real. Because they saw it themselves, that generation. They saw, imagine if it didn't happen. Imagine this bozo rabbi getting paid $1 million, getting paid $1 million a year, this guy. And he says the Exodus didn't happen. What do you mean the Exodus didn't happen? So why is it an obligation to tell the story? No, that doesn't exist either. What do you mean? We got all these other things, all these other signs that show there's an obligation that we came out of Egypt. So what happened? We all ate the same hallucinogenic mushroom in the desert. That's what happened. You know, that's how we got to Sinai. Doesn't make any sense, right? But the fact that they were there, imagine they said to Moshe Rabbeinu, no, we weren't there. It didn't happen. What are you talking about? 3 million people, right? So that generation, who they tell it to? They told it to their kid. Their kids told it to their kids. Hey, Grandpa saw it. He was there. You can't deny that, right? The Christians, the Muslims both agree. God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. Where were the Jews? They were in the desert. How'd they get to the desert? They came out of Egypt. Everybody agrees. Right? It's funny. I had these Mormons, you know, and you know, trying to show me how this proof for JC and different things. And the last thing they said is, isn't it amazing? You know, John Smith found this book, 200 years, buried in a cave. Unbelievable story. I said, you ever read Exodus 19? Exodus 18, 19? They go, what are you talking about? Jews came out of Egypt, 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women and children. 3 million people. Nobody denies it. God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. Wow, that's an amazing story. I said, yeah, it beats your story of 200 years in a cave, right? So that was, you know, checkmate for that also, right? But again, if it's real and they live it, you're not going to distort it, right? You're certainly not going to distort it. Now, people want to change the meaning. You know, again, you can have these leftists having a Passover Seder and it represents something totally different, but essentially it's the same story, right? They're not going to distort the story. The story is the same. It doesn't change. So therefore, if you live it, then it's going to be much more real. So also, if you go back to the time that predates the Mishnah, remember, the Mishnah is a commentary on the Torah. The Gemara is a commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah and the Gemara together make up what we know as the Talmud, right? So if you go back, there are mikvahs. There are mikvahs that predate the Mishnah, mikvah, where someone went to dunk in water to become pure for any number of reasons, right? It could be a woman, you know, after she gets her period to be permitted to her husband. Could be, you know, a man after he has a seminal emission, whatever, different things. But there are, you know, before the Mishnah, there already is this idea, and there's proof that there were mikvahs before that. There are tefillin, phylacteries, whatever you want to kill them, go back more than 2,000 years, more than 2,100 years. Right? What does the Torah tell me? Torah tells me there's a pit, a spring, collection of water, and you go in it, for whatever reason you became impure, you are now going to become pure. There are thousands, hundreds, thousands of laws of what makes something a kosher mikvah. Now again, you want to tell me it's rabbinic? Good, right? But doesn't matter. There are mikvahs found on Masada. There are mikvahs that are Herodian, and they conform to the code of Jewish law in the 17th century. So how can that be? That's a pretty amazing thing. In other words, even if you have later mikvahs at the time of the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch in the 17th century, how can all the mikvahs be exactly the same? And how the rainwater comes in and what the size of it is. Boy, are they lucky. 40,000 mikvahs are all the same. Tefillin, all the parchment inside, what's supposed to be inside there is all the same from 2,000 years back. Even before it's written down, how'd they know that? How in the world they know that? And now what do you have? You got also the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Dead Sea Scrolls certainly relate a lot of information. So where did they get their information from? They got their information, obviously, from oral law, right? From the rabbis. And they all say, same thing. Septuagint, right? Translated by the sages, right? And Torah being translated, right? Many things that they translated with oral law in mind. Now you're going to say, how'd they know? They're, some are in Israel, some in Babylonia, this, that. How did they know? Before it's written down. That's how they knew. But again, all this is corroborated. It's not haphazard. You got thousands and thousands of laws. Just go back to tefillin, or mikvah. You got thousands and thousands of laws. But if the mikvahs predate the Mishnah, they come before the Mishnah was even written down, and they all conform to the status of Jewish law, right? They all conform to Jewish law. Then either you're unbelievably lucky. You have, hundreds and thousands of mikvahs that are all the same. How can they all be the same? Right? They shouldn't be the same. Right? But if they had the same information and it was passed down, so they had certain things they had to do. It had to be this amount. The rainwater had to come this way, right? Whatever it is, right? But they all had to conform to the same standard. Now, the Torah tells me also, right, according to the prophet Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah says you're not allowed to carry. You're not allowed to do business on the Sabbath. Right? Now, the Torah tells me three things about the laws of Shabbos. I'm not allowed to carry. I'm not allowed to cook. Right? And what else? I'm not allowed to light a fire. Three things. Now, the Torah doesn't necessarily forbid commerce. Torah doesn't tell me really anything about commerce. Comes along the prophet Jeremiah. Prophet Jeremiah tells me commerce is forbidden. He's a prophet. This is not oral law, right? There was no oral law at this time, seemingly. So how do you know? If he's a prophet, no one denies he's a prophet. He's not a false prophet, God forbid, right? Even the Christians will agree he's a true prophet. If he's a true prophet, where did he get his prophecy from? Got it from God himself. If he got it from God himself, he can't be a liar. Can't be a fake, right? Where did he get the information from? How did he know? You're not allowed to do work. You're not allowed to do business on Shabbos. You can say maybe he made it up. He's a prophet. A prophet cannot make stuff up. You're not allowed to make stuff up. He'd be a false prophet. They kill him, right? Book of Deuteronomy says clear. False prophet, even if he does miracles. You kill him, right? He's a danger, right? Who was the last false prophet? Amongst the Jewish people, was Shabtai Tzvi, almost destroyed the entire Jewish people. So they found out he was a fake. A lot of people followed him. Regardless, how is Jeremiah going to know? How is he going to know commerce is forbidden? He must have known from oral tradition. But the prophets took it as a given. It's not like, oh, maybe someone said like this, or maybe it was that. It was clear to them. It was like the palm of their hand. Right? Hey, what is that in my hand? They knew it clear, right? There was no issue. There are two last proofs over here. One is there's a universality and a consistency, even though it's complex. And how do I know? I mean, we know it's complex because, there are a lot of laws. But I also know the calendar. right? Hillel established the calendar. How do we know when the holidays are? How would a Karaite know when the holidays are? Even though they mess up by Shavuot, right? Because they take the Torah, obviously, literally, that it's, it's after Shabbos, so for them it'll always be later than when we hold. But regardless, how do they know the Jewish calendar? The only way they know the Jewish calendar is because Hillel fixed it, right? They used to do it by seeing the moon, and then they would have like smoke signals, so to speak, from one mountain to another, and then the Kutites came and they messed everything up, so Hillel had to fix the calendar. Now, how did he fix the calendar? This is pretty ingenious. He fixed the calendar in a way that the holidays have to fall out at the right time. Passover, Torah tells me, has to be in Aviv, has to be in the spring. Sukkot always has to be in the fall. Now, we go by a lunar calendar, just like the Muslims. They also go by a lunar calendar. What's the problem with the lunar calendar? Lunar calendar is 11 and a half days short of a solar calendar. So if they're 11 and a half days short, then what happens? Then that means that the dates can be thrown off. See, by the Muslims, Ramadan can be winter, spring, summer, or fall. It doesn't matter. They don't adjust the calendar. For us, we have an obligation to adjust the calendar. Because I think every 19 years, there are seven years within 19 years that there's a leap year. You have to add on another month. Because if I don't add another month, then the holidays don't fall out when they're supposed to. Now that's pretty crucial. You have to know when the holidays are. If you don't know when the holidays are and it's all haphazard, they have to be in the right time. If they have to be in the right, now again, Karaite to be very happy here. The Torah tells me, clear as day, Passover has to be in spring. If you have 11 and a half day difference with the solar calendar, after 2 or 3 years, what's going to happen? It's going to go to the summer. It's going to go to the fall, right? Passover go to the fall. It can't be in the fall. Why can't it be in the fall? Because the Torah tells me it's going to be in spring. If it's going to bring in spring, then what do I do? What do I do? So how's the Karaite going to celebrate? How's it going to celebrate Passover? It'd be on the wrong day. It has to be a certain, certain month. It's going to be the first month. Well, that first month could be in the summer. Could be in the winter. Right? And if it's in the winter, I got a major problem. Or if it's in the summer, it doesn't matter. It's not in springtime. If it's not in springtime, what do I do? What do I do if I don't have oral law? Checkmate. What do? You need oral law. You need that calendar fixed. Right? So Hillel and his ultimate wisdom fixed the calendar. And it was accepted, and that's what we do today. That's how, all the holidays fall out at the right time, year in and year out. And in every so many years, there's a leap year, right? There's an extra, there's an extra month, so the holidays fall at the right time. I always get this question, family member ask, what day is Rosh Hashanah? I said it's, the first day of Tishrei. So I no, the English date. They go, you don't know the English date? I said, no, I know the Hebrew date. The Hebrew date never changes. It's only the English date. Sometimes it'll be the beginning of September. Sometimes it'll be in the middle of September. Sometimes it could be at the end of September. It depends, right? Rosh Hashanah, I don't have to adjust. Passover, Sukkot, I have to adjust. Because if Sukkot, let's say, was in the summer, then if you built a sukkah and you go into your sukkah in the summer, people will say you're doing it for the sake of shade. Doesn't matter if it's 100 degrees, right? You're going in it for the sake of shade. But if Sukkot is in the fall, and in most places in the fall it's cold, right? You're not going there for to cool off, right? You're only going there for one reason, and that's for the sake of the mitzvah, right? That's it. Now, what's the last idea? The last idea, that most famous idea to prove oral law must be passed down, right? There must be a way to do it, and that is cholent. What's cholent? Right? Many people eat it on Shabbos. What is cholent? It's a stew, right? It's a mixture. It's a mixture of beans, potatoes, barley, meat. People put in rice. Maybe people put in kishka, whatever it is. So how does that prove oral law? Why would I say it proves oral law? Now, the reason is we eat hot food. We have an obligation, the Jewish people, to eat hot food on Shabbos. Because what do the Karaites say? Karaites tell me, Torah says you're not allowed to kindle a fire. Okay, so what if I leave a light on? I didn't kindle it, it's on already. Right? So according to them, you have to sit in the dark. According to them, you're not allowed to eat any hot food. It all has to be cold. Right? Certainly Shabbos day, you're not going to be able to heat it up. Can't light a fire. Right? So you're not going to have hot food. Right? So the rabbis instituted, it's a good thing to eat cholent. The longer you cook it, the better it is, as long as you have enough water, you don't burn it out. Right? But the purpose of eating hot food on Shabbos, especially cholent, is to show that we're not Karaites. Right? Is to show that there's such a thing as oral tradition. Because the rabbis say you're allowed to heat things up. Right? You're not allowed to cook on an open flame, that's true. You're allowed to reheat. You're allowed to use a hot plate. Right? You're allowed to use what we call a blech. You take a metal, something metal to cover up the fire, and you put something on top of it before Shabbos. It can finish on Shabbos, whatever, right? But you're allowed to reheat. You're not allowed to necessarily cook 100%. Good. What do the Karaites say? I'm not allowed to light a match. I'm not allowed to kindle a fire. I got to sit in the dark. I got to eat cold food. Come along the rabbis and say, we're going to show we're not heretics like the Karaites. We're going to show beyond the shadow of a doubt the Torah is true, right? And to believe in what the rabbis tell us, one very simple reason, because we're going to eat hot food on Shabbos. And hot food says and shows that oral tradition is true because we're allowed to put it on a hot plate. We're allowed to reheat it, right? We're not, the person want to eat cold food, you can. Right? Certainly Shabbos day, you don't necessarily have to eat, something's piping hot, right? But the tradition is you eat something hot because Friday night's already hot, right? So that wouldn't be such a proof. Come 12 hours later, 15 hours later, you're going to now eat something hot on Shabbos day. What does that show? It shows we're not Karaites, right? It shows that oral tradition is true, right? Because, otherwise we wouldn't be allowed to eat something hot, and that is a proof. That would be the last proof, the fact that it's passed down, orally because, again, we're allowed to reheat. And if you're allowed to reheat, we want to show that reheating is fine, and we're allowed to do that. And that knocks out the Karaites, right? That is based, on oral tradition. So there are a number of reasons, that we brought out here in order to show that, no, it's not a big game of telephone. It's something that was so crucial to the Jewish people, everybody knew, right? People had different things to remember. This one had this to remember, that one, but there were hundreds, thousands of, of chains, but the centrality of the whole thing, right? That's why Judaism sticks by the people that keep it, and they keep it properly. The ones that change it, that pick and choose, they're all disappearing. Right? That's not, unfortunately, it's 90% of the Jewish people. Because they make it into a pretzel. They turn the Torah into a pretzel. You want to hold fast to what the Torah says? You want to listen to the rabbis? Then you have a chance of passing that down to the next generation. And as much as people want to say, I'm still going to hold by it, I'm not going to listen to the rabbis, I'm not going to do this, we mentioned a number of times, it's crucial that the Torah survives. Right? Because God says many times in the Torah, it's forever. Now, if 95% of the Jewish people are opting out, not because someone's putting a gun to their head, but they're opting out because they don't want to keep tradition. They don't want to be bogged down. They want to live their lives, eat, drink, and be merry, lest tomorrow I die. So even if I say, forget the rabbis, forget this, forget everything we said, does it work? Now, I don't understand why that's not checkmate 3. Because if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter what your philosophy is. It just means you don't want to listen, you don't want to conform. That's all it means. It means I want to do whatever I want to do. Okay? So if you admit I'm going to do whatever I want, fine. God says many times, at least admit it. And if you're going to admit it, also realize that you're going to be a fossil. And that you're going to have nobody to pass it down to. I don't care if there are 50,000 Karaites left in the world. They're a fossil. What have the Karaites done, for the world, in the last 20 years, last 50 years, last 100 years. Right, so it doesn't matter. All this is moot. But the point is, the point is that what we have can easily be proven. Right, we listed a number of reasons, right? Of how oral law had to be known and how it had to be passed on, because everyone's doing the same thing. You'll tell me, okay, Sephardic people have a few different customs, Hasidic people have a few different customs. Yeah, but 99%, everyone agrees on everything. Different customs are different things. That has nothing to do with whether it's passed down or not, right? Whether it's a game of telephone, it has nothing to do with that, right? They took different customs from different places, but doesn't negate the Torah, doesn't uproot it, certainly doesn't uproot it in any way. Right. So that being the case, we should all be in agreement. We should all be playing our banjo, singing Kumbaya and everything, and everything's good. But it definitely shows why it can't be a game of telephone, and why you have, the example we gave by mikvahs, by tefillin, that adhered, to the halachas, to Jewish law, even before Jewish law was codified. How do you explain that? The only way you can explain, I'll tell you how you explain, it's very easy. The only way you explain it is because they had oral law. They had other knowledge. But everyone's doing the exact same thing. That's pretty uncanny, right? Pretty uncanny. So how is that? Because again, you had individuals, you had families, right? But you had all these different chains. When you have all these different chains and it's so central to your life, and it's so important, and it's so crucial, okay, it's the whole different ballgame. Something like that is like saying, how much money do I have in my pocket, right? That is going to be crucial, and that is going to, how you're going to pass it down, and it's not a big game of telephone. Check. Mate.
I seen it coming, man. That's funny.
Any questions? Any questions? Come on, just gave you 10 different proofs. 10 different proofs. Who's got a question? Come on. Okay, where are my trolls? Come on.
So let's see how the YouTube channel is surviving. Okay. Yeah, for all you guys who like to make points, definitely tag me if you have a comment or a question that you would like to share. I don't see any tags, so but yeah. So I don't see anything. So, yeah, I guess we'll find out just as we watch the replay of the video later. There'll be more comments added as the follow-ups would be.
I'm sure. So, listen, if I'm screaming, I'm speaking a mile a minute, no one's going to be able to comment. So you got to give them a little bit of time.
That's okay. That's okay. Yep, I hear you.
You got to let it play it back a little bit.
Right. For sure. Heck yeah, man. Well, I'll tell you what, it's been a good show. So next week, I guess if we might be stumbling on to another topic, unless, of course, we can get enough comments or concerns that we want to make a part 4. I mean, realistically, this series, honestly, I'm kind of hoping that this little, now we're on part 3. I'm kind of hoping that enough people watch this that they will start bringing up enough concerns to where we can keep this one series going for about 10 or 11 weeks, because there is a lot.
If you want, we can take some of those more controversial issues about pedophilia, other things, and see exactly what it means.
Oh yeah,
and how people have taken it out of context. We could do that also.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's kind of what I'm hoping this will trickle into, because I know I've heard complaints and accusations over the years myself that actually I was concerned with in my beginning stages until I researched it as well. But that would be a good time to actually have a cluster of videos on controversial issues that happen like right here back to back to back and what we'll do is we'll see how long this goes on, and then I'll go back and relabel these 10 videos, repackage them with a different title that will cluster them together in one unit, and might even create a different folder so they're all together. So definitely
you can call it a Messianic and Karite's nightmare. Checkmate.
you crack me up, man. I'll tell you what.
Great show. A lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. Well, good deal. All right. Well, Rabbi, thank you so much for your time as usual, and look forward to seeing you again next week, Hashem willing. You have a great rest of your week. All right. Take care. Shalom. Bye.
Shalom.
Shalom, everybody. Y'all have a great week.